These are also sex workers or people living with HIV, same with cis men. Prevention, so this is actually the main goal of the association. In prevention, we do condom distributions, rapid testing, we distribute auto tests, we also do PrEP and PEP consultations. 65 to 75 of our community are sex workers, so 38% living with HIV. 12 with combination of hepatitis B and hepatitis C, and 6% are co-infected HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. In 2021, we have been distributed 10,064 condoms times 8. So meaning, we give 8 condoms for each girls. A year? Yes, a year. So that's the total of 10,064 times 8. In places where the girls work, because in Paris there is this certain area where you can find all the sex workers, trans, cis men and women. So this is for the prevention. And a total of 501 TROD or rapid tests, 50 cis men, 80 cis women, and 371 trans. 53 person ages 18 to 24, 397 ages 25 to 49, and 51 ages 50 plus. We have tested 3 positive in the past, meaning in the association itself, in the bureau, and 1 in the forest. 488 TROD was done in PAS and 13 in the forest. Why we have a small number of TROD in the forest? Because sometimes, actually, our prevention really depends with our bus. Because if our bus is not really working, so we cannot do more about the prevention, because we cannot do the prevention by walking, because usually the prevention starts at 10 in the evening and we finish like 1 or 2, it depends. And imagine walking in the forest, so we suffer our security. So that's why this is the reason why every time we do the prevention, we should have a bus to do the prevention. Caisse première assurance maladie, or I check it in English. It's a primary health insurance funds, where this is also very important because in this institution, they do the aid medical, or this is the health card actually. Aid medical, when we say aid medical, this is the health card of the people who doesn't have paper or are not legal in France. So last year, we have done 345 person, and CSS is Complementary Santé Solidarité. This is for the people who have document, but their earnings are lower, because in France there is a minimum amount you earn for the month for you to have CSS and aid medical card. And 89% others like Carte Vital or request for ALD, like transformations and everything. And before it was only 3 months proof. So that's why domiciliation is very important. So because this is the first proof you have in the territory of France. So usually, when you have your domiciliation in the paper, it is written the date. So we start counting until you reach the 3 months. And because, as I said a while ago, some of the girls work in the provinces, and some they don't have permanent address. So when they go to the association to take their letters, we have a file and then we write their names. So I put them in the system. So once they reach the 3 months, so the Caisse Première Assurance Maladie asks for the présence of proof of presence, so I can give them attestation for them to facilitate for the aid medical. But that was before, it was 3 months, but now it is 6 months. What was the reason why they, instead of, before it was 3 months, now they make it more? Because according to the government, as a tourist, when you arrive in France, basically you have your health insurance. So after your health insurance finishes, then you will start the 3 months through. Or sometimes if you have visa, when you enter in France and you have visa, we need to finish the visa first, and then we need to wait for 3 months. So this is the time where we can process your health card, or aid medical. Assistance social, okay. What our assistance social do? This service, it's also important for the girls, because here they can ask for social housing, demand for CAP or Caisse Allocation Familiale, family allowance fund, Pôle emploi for the people who want or who search for the job, and also for prefecture, for legalizations, or if you have problem administrative, and physical aid. When I say physical aid, like accompany mo, like for example, you have a problem in your health, because most of our populations are Spanish-speaking people. So when they go to the hospital, they don't really speak French. So we have this person to accompany, to go with them to see the doctors or to do administrative work. We have also prison and housing. In 2021, we have 5 trans, and in the prison, 3 were liberated and still in the, 2 is still in the prison. This year, we have 16. In prison, 4 were liberated, 14 is still in the prison. 16 are 4 from Brazil, 2 French, 4 Moroccan, Algeria, French, 2 from Guyana, and 1 Colombian, and 3 Peru. 1 Brazil, 1 Algeria, French, 1 Peru, and 1 French are liberated. My colleagues visit the prison once a week to see and talk with the girls. What is the problem? Because my colleagues always have a fight with the responsible for the prison, because for the prison it is really complicated for the trans. When I say trans non-operated, because if you were in the prison and you are a trans non-operated, you cannot mingle with the women or the men. So meaning you're isolated. You cannot do anything. You're just in this area, not the same as trans-operated. For the trans-operated, they have the rights to mingle with the women, but not for the trans who doesn't have any sexual reassignment or whatever. PASS also, Association PASS has also 2 apartments where it can host at least 6 persons. With the first contract, it's 3 months and maximum of 2 years. The purpose of this basically are for the people who's living with HIV, or the people who were liberated from the prison, because usually when you go out from the prison, you don't have any place to stay. So we accommodate them until we process for legalization, until we ask them for their own apartment or whatever. And food food and sanitary packages. Actually, this is exceptional because this is not really a part of the association. We just only did this program during the pandemic and after the pandemic because of the issue of earnings with the sex workers and everything. Because then is so during and after the pandemic and until today, we have, with the collaboration of PAS and other associations, we have distributed total of 2,975 food packages and 400 sanitary packages with our community, persons in situation of food insecurity, and people who never supported by other associations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much. Let's give a hand to Kim again. I'm prepared now. So next we are going to have Lucas Stevenson. Hold your questions for Kim as well until the end. So we have two more presentations, one from Belgium and across Europe actually, and the other is from Greece. So we're having our third presenter, who is Lucas Stevenson. So Lucas is a male sex worker and operations officer at the European Sex Workers' Rights Alliance. It's a network of more than 100 organizations providing services in supporting sex workers' rights in Europe and Central Asia. Lucas is part of a multidisciplinary team which advocates for the rights of sex workers in diverse policy fields such as access to health, justice, digital rights, and social inclusion. Lucas worked extensively across Europe with sex workers from various backgrounds, including migrant and LGBTI sex workers. He is also currently responsible demission, oh my God, French, to Jasmine, which is a project of Médecins du Monde, France, which aims to address and reduce violence against sex workers. And he sits on the board of directors of the Global Networks of Sex Workers' Rights. So, Luca, you're welcome.
Thank you, Denise. So I'm going to try to stick to the 7 minutes. So thank you very much for the invitation. As Denise was mentioning, my name is Luca. I've been a sex worker for more than 20 years now, which says something about my age. And I was the previous coordinator of the European Sex Worker Rights Alliance, and I now work as an operations officer. I don't have a presentation. If you want more information about what we do, you can visit our website. In particular, in news and resources, you can find lots of reports that we've been developing and lots of information about the different activities that we do. So I was going to talk generally about the situation for sex workers and migrant sex workers, in particular in relation to access to health in Europe. So as Denise was saying, we have more than 100 organizations in around 35 countries in Europe and Central Asia. And we know that in Europe, and in particular Western Europe, the vast majority of people who sell sex are migrants. But often when we talk about, I think Christiana was making this point as well, migrant sex workers, like migrant communities, are extremely diverse, and there's a lot of specific needs depending on either like countries of origin, gender, sexual orientation, and other issues that can intersect with migrant status. So, is it okay? All right. So just because I got a nice t-shirt, so I was trying to be like, which happened to be on sale on our website. It is here. And so for us, it's very important, like when we talk about migrant sex workers, to really analyze what are the specific needs of migrant sex workers. So we just heard from Kim about the work that PAS is doing. PAS is one of our members. We have other members here. We have a Black Sex Worker Collective over here. We have Comitato in Italy over here. And all these organizations provide different types of services for sex workers and migrant sex workers. And in particular, let's say, the work that PAS is doing with migrant, trans particular women is quite specific, and they face specific forms of like precarity and vulnerability, including discrimination, transphobia, violence, etc. And it is quite different to the work that would say Red Umbrella Athens is doing with sex workers, many of them being refugees from Syria or coming from Eastern Europe, etc. And the situation has also been developing now with the war invasion in Ukraine, and the situation of many Ukrainian migrants also working in the sex industry in different parts of Europe. But one thing that is really critical for us, and then that's why we really appreciated the research that was done by the ITM, is that actually there is very limited data on migrant sex workers. So if you look at the research that was developed, and if you look at data, we really lack data. And the reason is that most sex workers will not disclose that they are sex workers when they go to healthcare professionals, because there's too many risks for sex workers to announce it. Either you can be criminalized because of prostitution law, because of sex work laws, because of your migration status, or for other reasons. So when you look at the data on HIV in Europe, you will see that it's really lacking on sex work. And for example, maybe like trans sex workers, trans women sex worker will be put in like trans category. Sex worker who use drugs will be put in people who use drugs category. Male sex worker will be put in the MSM category. But we actually really lack clarity about what are the specific needs of sex workers in all these different categories. And actually, I don't know if there is anyone from ECDC here. The latest report from the European Center for Disease Control is actually quite a read. If you have the energy and time to read it, I really recommend reading it, because it really tells you everything you need to know about the lack of information that we have. And actually, the report shows that there is a complete lack of data, or inaccurate or flawed data. And I think my favorite sentence about this report is this. 90% so the government have to respond questions about HIV prevalence, about the different laws that impact sex workers. And there's a question is like, do your country have laws that impact sex workers' access to HIV treatment and care? And so out of like, I think 40 respondents, 90% said, 90% of EU countries' government report that they do not have laws that act as barriers to HIV prevention, treatment and care for sex workers. Which for us is the crux of the problem, is that we are asking governments to report on a population that they are actively discriminating and criminalizing. So we know that in Europe there's been an increase of criminalization of sex work, and in particular the criminalization of clients, which is also known as the Swedish model. And I don't know if you're aware of it, the Swedish model is developed technically as a way to protect people in prostitution. So in that system, prostitution is seen as a form of violence against women, and clients are seen as perpetrators of violence. So the logic answer is that to criminalize clients in order to protect and save women in prostitution. The reality is that these laws were pushed through a very moral and ideological agenda, and often a very racist agenda as well. We know Norway criminalized clients of sex workers following an increase of Nigerian women visibly working in the street of Oslo and other big cities. And we see that this criminalization of client, has a really big impact on sex workers, and in particular the most precarious sex workers. So in France, we know the situation has extremely deteriorated since 2016, since there was this new law to criminalize clients of sex workers. And there's been a huge increase of violence against sex workers. So I was mentioning I'm also working with Jasmine Project from Médecins du Monde. I'm a volunteer, responsable de mission in this project. And we know that violence has increased. There was a specific period where there was 10 murders of sex workers in a very short period. And in particular, trans sex workers, migrant trans sex workers are the ones facing really, really high levels of violence, not just in France, but in Ireland, Norway, Sweden. We know that basically populations that are racist and transphobic, etc., anti-sex workers will attack sex workers more likely when they feel that sex workers don't have the capacity to report to the police, etc. And this also impacts sex workers' access to healthcare. We know that many migrant sex workers are worried and afraid to go to health services because they're afraid that the health services might be connected to immigration authorities, to the police, and they face deportation in that case. And I think specifically on to go back on trans people selling sex, there is research by Transgender Europe that shows that in Europe, of the total number of trans people who are murdered, 73% were migrants. And globally, 97% of trans people who are murdered are trans women. And among this population, around 60% whose profession is known are sex workers. It is likely to be much higher. So we know that the high burden of violence and murder that trans community face is actually really impacting, in particular, trans women and migrant trans women. So I said I would speak 7 minutes, and it's been 7 minutes. So in one point, so I think the issue of data is critical for us, and I really hope we can encourage better collaboration with academic partners, with ECDC, with UNAIDS, with others, to really try to get a better idea. Because without clear data on sex workers and migrant sex workers and HIV, we're not able to have a very evidence-based advocacy. And we see, for example, our network, ESWA, we're quite a strong network now. We have several staff members, etc. We really struggle to get any funding related to health because different funders will say, well, actually, you're not a priority. Look at sex workers. They're not a priority in comparison to men who have sex with men or people who use drugs. But as long as we don't have the data, it's like a vicious circle. We don't have the data to actually do the advocacy, to get the right data, and to get the right policy. So we're in a circle of criminalization and discrimination that impact migrant sex workers' access to health. And in terms of best practice, I think there's not much to say following a Kim presentation. We know, and it's recommended, that the best practice for any marginalized communities is community leadership and community empowerment. We know that the best way to approach and reach out to migrants community and sex workers community is community-led organization. So in our membership, we have around 100 organizations. Around 40 of them are led by sex workers. Many of them are led by migrant sex workers. And I think this is what we really recommend, that sex worker-led organization be supported, that funding for sex worker-led organization be available and be quite easily available. I think for many sex worker-led organizations and migrant sex worker-led in particular, the bureaucracy to be able to access any kind of funding is just a huge barrier. Like even without thinking of like language barrier, education, etc., this funding needs to be much more accessible, and that's really a big issue for us. And I think that's all I wanted to say. And yeah, so check our website and contact us, talk to us. And you're also welcome to join our network if you work on sex workers. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you. So we have one final presentation before we go for the Q&A. And Ian Robert is a certified psychologist and a practicing psychotherapist in Greece. Ian, the culture indifference and inadequate response to HIV in Greece is something that Ian is committed to addressing. He has become politically active in social change. His first degree was in nursing, and he proceeded to do professional training as a translator and interpreter to help cover the language barrier amongst migrant communities. He has a master's degree in counseling and psychotherapy and is currently doing a global public health master in Athens University. He has created a self-advocacy group to empower victims of torture in Greece, and is no stranger to the world of non-profit organizations. He previously worked with MSF. He has also been working with AF as a volunteer, and currently he is the founder and programs director of Open Paths Athens. So Ian, you're welcome to share with us experiences from Greece.
Thank you, Dennis, and good morning to everyone. Everyone shared a lot of things that I wanted to cover. So I will try to give you basically my own lived experience from this field. I will try to give you what I see, what I know, what I think, and what I feel from my general experience working in the migration sector. So in Greece, in 2019, there was a big change. We had elections, and in the elections, we had a new change of government. The new government is a far-right government, and basically in their pre-election campaigns, they made a promise to the electorates that they are going to make stringent laws that are going to deter migrants from coming to Greece. So in these legislations, in their first month of office, they immediately went and changed the migration law. And when they did this, they restricted access to asylum, to international protection, to migration in general, and to health, and to the access to the labor market for all migrants and asylum seekers in Greece. This was done by the creation of specific legislations and policies that were punitive, according to me, for this population. I can start by stating that now one of the biggest laws and changes they made was to create a very controlled system for NGOs working in Greece. This led to many international NGOs and local NGOs to close, which created a huge gap, especially when it comes to primary health care access. And now, as we are talking, EASO, which is a big international organization, is also being forced through this law to leave Greece. EASO is the organization that was paying for caseworkers and interpreters for the asylum service in Greece. So at the moment, they are leaving Greece, and there's a shortage of caseworkers and interpreters. So we have thousands of people who do not have access to their right for international protection. At the same time, as I've written, they introduced new legislation that is restrictive and limiting to asylum seekers in Greece. What do I mean by this? Now, for you to apply for asylum, you need to do this in the islands. And if you are already in the mainland, for you to apply for asylum, you are detained for 25 days just for applying for asylum. So this, as a fact, prohibits people who are already inside of Greece from applying for asylum. At the same time, in the new law, when it came out, they changed how the asylum system works. Before, everyone had access to healthcare. Everyone had access to apply for the social security number. But after this change, if you're an asylum seeker, you are issued a temporary social security number, which is linked to your asylum card. And the asylum card has an expiry date. So when your asylum card expires, your access to health also expires. And we had COVID, and because of COVID, all offices were closed. So many people were left in a gap and in a limbo where they did not have access to health. At the same time, the law says that if you're an asylum seeker, you do not have the right to apply or to work for the first 6 months. So in the first 6 months, you have 150 euro of social benefits, and you need to survive with this. And the healthcare system is linked to the taxes that you pay. So if you do not work, how can you access health? So these are questions that are creating a lot of barriers for people that we work with in Athens. Another restriction is that for migrants, they have initiated a written exam in Greek for you to get a long stay residency permit or to be able to access citizenship. So again, it is putting bigger barriers for people to access their rights and to access their right for basic human rights. And the most important point that I wanted to share with you is that they revoked the issuance of the humanitarian residency permit for special reasons, specifically for HIV people and people with long diseases. This was a process that was issued even for asylum seekers. So if you are an HIV positive person and you did not have any documentation, you could enter the asylum process, and through the asylum process, you could be referred to be given a residency permit for humanitarian reasons and be able to stay and get treatment. But this has been revoked. So this creates a huge barrier for us. We're facing a huge barrier because we have a lot of undocumented people or people who lost their documents because of unemployment, who are migrants and lost their documents, and treatment for HIV for people who are undocumented. It's very difficult to link them to care because, as I mentioned before, linkage to care is linked to your legal status. So if you do not have documents, you do not have access to healthcare. And if you are undocumented and we eventually link you to care, you have 3 months of getting treatment. After 3 months, it stops. So we have to find a different way. So even if I put you in treatment, I need to think of what will I do after 3 months in order for me to help and protect you. And sorry, can we go back? It's important. A little bit back. Yes. I mentioned asylum seekers being used as pawns. At the moment in Greece, we have a geopolitical situation between Greece and Turkey. And Turkey holds the gate to most of the asylum seekers and migrants who want to have access to Europe. And this is a play between the two states. And during COVID, for example, Turkey opened its doors and its borders, and thousands of people crossed the borders and came to Greece. The reaction of the state was to revoke the right for people to access their right for international protection for a month. So again, it is how we are dealing with this. And also, we have many pushbacks. And I think most of you, since you're working in the humanitarian sector, you have seen what is happening with the pushbacks. The government, many reports have been issued, but there's no answer from the government on what they're going to do in terms of pushback. The asylum service is understaffed. Our hospitals and our healthcare system is also understaffed because due to COVID, many healthcare professionals refused to be vaccinated, and the law was changed and said if you're not vaccinated, you cannot work in the public sector. So in the islands, for example, where there's a little short number of medical care staff, if you are not vaccinated, which is a huge number of medical staff, there are no doctors basically in the islands to support our population who have limited access to care. And we also have many administrative barriers that you know, delays in decisions, in renewals, and all of these things. But it is very interesting, and the reaction, yes, it's very interesting to see the reaction of the governments and the states when it came to the Ukraine crisis, because all of the barriers I mentioned were easily overcome, and all of this, they all gained access. So this is just my feeling and my question for us to discuss at some point. Sorry. In terms of HIV, as I've written, there are no campaigns or state awareness programs at all, not only for the migrant population, but also for the general population. There are no educative and prevention programs from the state or from the civil society for refugees and migrants. Through this project, we started working with the communities and creating these educational programs. In terms of activities, in Greece, the only activities related to HIV is during the Pride and the HIV Day in December. Other than that, there is nothing else. And there is also a huge problem in terms of community testing. It's difficult for people to do testing because of the legislation, and most people who are doing testing like us, we do it in the gray area. And this is not only as open parts, but it's also like MSF, MVI, MDM, anyone who's doing testing does it, but on a gray area. And this also explains the lack of data from Greece. In general, when you look at the ECDC reports, we have a very huge gap. Yes? And what I would like to share and what I feel is that the Greek government should create more access and treatment for all, regardless of your legal status. We should create more space for community testing and increase the cultural competency for healthcare professionals in the hospitals and healthcare centers. And we also need to have resources to create educational materials, informative materials, so that they can reach the communities. Most people do not know about PrEP. PrEP just recently was voted to be implemented in Greece just a month ago. So when you ask people about PrEP, they don't know what PrEP is. They don't know what PEP is. So there is a huge need for the creation of these resources for our communities and for the people we want to deal with. And last but not least, I wanted to say that, there's no way for us to reach the 3.3 goal of Sustainable Development Goals without engaging with migrants and refugees, and the current political environment in Greece is not making that possible. Thank you very much.
So I request you to take a seat. Thank you, Ian, for those insights from Greece. So we're almost coming to the end of this session. We have just a few minutes to take questions, and I would like to request Paula to come up, Kim and Luca, please to come and join the panel. So thank you, our wonderful panelists, for your very insightful contributions from your respective countries. I think we have some questions, so we are going to take a few questions. We have about 10 minutes of questions, and then we'll break for lunch. So I think Letonde has a question.
Number two.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers for their contribution. I do not really have. I have many questions, but I would just like to focus on one important thing concerning Italy. And the last speaker prompted me to remember that today is the last day before the Italian government, that's tomorrow, will eventually renew the memorandum, Italian government and Libya. And this is a terrible thing that's going to happen again, I think for another 5 years. That's an agreement that allows traffickers, that allows violence, that allows the Libyan militia to treat migrants the way they want to. And we all know what happens in Libya. We all know all the torture the people go through. And we have been, as civil society, petitioning against this. Unfortunately, we have a new far-right government. So we have no idea, at least for what I know, Luciano, the new government hasn't said anything and probably will renew this. Yeah, that's our fate in Italy. We're left, we're right, but we're still worse. We're just bad anyway. Yeah. So this is it. I have other questions, but I will pass over to other colleagues.
Okay. Thank you. Also, in addition to what you said, there is also an agreement between Greece, the European Union, and Turkey, and this states that Turkey is a safe country. So any migrant who passes from Turkey into Greece, the asylum application is examined for their safety in Turkey first, and then their country. So there is a general concept in terms of asylum and the right for international protection in a one-size-fits-all. And we are all human beings, as it was mentioned before. We are individuals, and every specific migrant or refugee has their own needs, and their needs to be examined on a person-to-person basis, not as a one-size-fits-all.
Susan?
Hi, thank you all so much for your really powerful presentations. Susan Cole from NAM AIDS Map. I'd like to ask you all, how significant do you think racism is as a cause of how appallingly migrants, particularly people of colour, are treated across Europe? Thank you.
Who would like to go first?
Well, for me personally, racism is really important because as Dennis introduced that I'm from the Philippines, so basically sometimes I feel there is some racism in terms of work or other. I feel that every time Dennis seated with me is doing something wrong. I don't know why. I don't know what to say. I'm lost.
I can
So
also...
yes, but in the association where I'm working, because we're dealing with different nationality, as much as possible, we don't want them to feel that they're not belong. So once they go to the association, to tell you honestly, actually, we're dealing like 38 different countries for the domiciliation. So as much as possible, we don't want them to feel that there is a racism inside the association, because the association is their home where they can tell everything. So that's why even me personally, sometimes I feel racism, but for the people who come to the association, it is very important for us, or for them to feel that racism doesn't exist in this association, especially for the trans. Thank you.
For me, I would say that us being in this room is really important. This partnership speaks louder than our individual efforts. Because now we are talking about us, by us. And the racism part you mentioned, that is one of the biggest problems. People who are not in our shoes or are not in the fields are talking and discussing about policies and making policies, but they do not know what it means and the experience. So this is important, and today is important. And me being in this podium today is very important. It takes a lot of courage. My stomach is going like grrr. Yes.
Well, maybe I share my point, okay? It's not the Portuguese point, but I think mostly than racism, we could talk about stigma and discrimination, because this discrimination is the bigger than racism in Portugal.
Okay, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just a small point. I think, as we were saying, like sex workers in Western Europe are like mainly migrants and many women, with like large number of like trans women as well. And I feel as well, like when we talk about structural racism, it's also important to also look within our movements. And I really feel like the HIV movement is also quite complicit in many issues related to racism. And, you know, we see the extreme right gaining power in many countries, not just in Europe, you know, but even the like defeat in Brazil was quite small, like we were all expecting better than that. And I do believe that the HIV movement is also need to step up, and so does the sex worker rights movement or the LGBTQI movement. Like this is an issue that should be central to like many organizations and many movements. And when you see that the HIV, the International AIDS Society, continue to hold conferences in places like, you know, North America or like Montreal, for example, where lots of like, you know, activists and advocates, like HIV advocates from like Africa, are not able to attend because of visa. I think there's some issues that have to be repeated all the time, and I do feel that, probably like not in this room, but in many organizations and HIV organizations, I've become a bit too comfortable with people in power who are giving them funding to do HIV services, and I've kind of lost their capacities to challenge some of these governments and these funders. So it's also like a message, not just to also like the HIV movement and the sex worker rights movement and LGBTQI movement to actually do more to address racism within our own structures as well.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you very much. We have a question from Cham, and then we'll have one from Tinosa.
Sorry? Oh, standing. Hi, my name is Cham from the UK, and I just want to say thank you, first of all, like all really amazing insights from you all and the work you're doing. My specific question is actually for Kim. I think we've spoken about the challenges of the ideologies and the biases that people have, policy and decision makers have, whether that's racism or, you know, just discrimination based on gender identity or sexuality. And I think I was really impressed with, you know, the description of your services and what you've managed to achieve in Paris, which, you know, we know, you know, these issues are common there in Paris as well. So my question is, how have you leveraged relationships with policymakers to actually, you know, get them to support your association, get them to give you the funding you need, get them to give you that status to be able to provide addresses for people, for migrants and for transgender people, to provide those really different services that are out of the mainstream? Because I think that's one of the things that, you know, what do we hold in our mind about actually what does it take to make change? Because I think the reality is so many doors are closed and, you know, oh, there's no funding for that. Oh, we have so many priorities. Oh, you know, we have to, policymakers, you know, far right is being driven by, you know, a more tightening or like our country first, our people first approach. So how is it that, you know, you kind of, circumvent that narrative, and, you know, how do you make it so that it's to the benefit? You know, we've spoken about how, you know, we're talking about infectious disease where, like, say for HIV, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're a migrant or not, you know, you can still get it. So yeah, just how some of that, like what worked for you from convincing policymakers to support the work?
Yeah, so you got the question, yeah?
Yeah. Actually, as we always say that our association is a small association with a small budget, but we have a lot of works to do. Especially we're doing a lot compared to the budget we receive. So that's why we're still searching for more benefactors so to support us and to make our work more bigger and to render all the services that our community needs. So since the association it's not that big and it's not has a big budget, so what we do is just like we use the small budget they give to us to do all the works we need to do to give the services for the girls. So I hope that would answer your question.
Thank you for that response. We'll take 2 questions, then we'll go for lunch. I think
here.
We have 3. Oh, wow, we have 4. No. Okay, so let's try and make it very quick. I know that we're running behind by about 15 minutes. You don't want to find lunch cold, so let's try and be fast. So you go first, Moro.
Thank you so much. My name is Moro Yafa. I come from Berlin. I'm an intercultural mediator working with sub-Saharan Africans in community level. And I'm also a steering committee of this project. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentations. I mean, I have noted so many questions down, but there's no time to go through all the questions that I have. I have one question for Kim. You said people have been put in jail. So what are the circumstances behind their detentions in jail? So why? Are they illegal because that's why in jail, or they're caught? Why in jail?
No, it's not necessarily mean that when I say people in jail, because they have some different cases. Like, for example, but definitely it doesn't involve the illegalization of a person, so that's why they put in jail. Like, for example, they have some criminal records, and they have some administrative records that's why they put it in jail. But definitely it's not about the legal status of the person why they put it in jail.
And the second question is for my brother over there, the last presenter. I mean, you have mentioned about government policy, but right-wing policies and unfavorable conditions for migrants. I mean, what of community level? Well, how do you interact with the community? How do you work with the community? If I mean community, the locals, the Greek locals, how do you interact with them? What are their support and solidarity behind you on your work?
The civil society is very supportive, but unfortunately for us, all the narrative is controlled by the government. The media is controlled by the government. And that makes it difficult for them, for the civil society also, to fight for their own rights. Because now in Athens, people are fighting for their own rights, their own civil rights. And when it comes to the migration situation, they are trying, but as I mentioned before, many grassroots organizations and big international NGOs are leaving Greece because of all the conditions that have been set by the new government. So it makes it difficult also to have this, the NGOs that were supporting the migrants, they are now slowly closing because there is no funding. And now, slowly, the professionals, the organizations are becoming smaller and smaller, which means that also their support and outreach is becoming smaller and smaller. And also, I will explain more.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. So we will we'll take a question from Mr. Brown there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Etiosa from Cyprus. I grew up in Greece. From Generation for Change CY, I'm the co-founder and managing director, and also steering committee of the Mi-Health program. I have a question for everyone. We also work with asylum seekers and refugees in Cyprus, and I really wanted to know that I'm also a community health worker. What are actually the efforts, if there are any efforts that any of you guys are actually using in terms of using those that have been diagnosed, newly diagnosed asylum seekers with HIV, in terms of adding it to their asylum claims, because as we know, some people back home in Africa or Middle East might not have access to care, or might be stigmatized and or actually engaged, tortured due to their status. So is there any effort in terms of using their newly diagnosed health status in order to access asylum? Thank you.
Who would like to take this?
Actually, in France, there is two ways. If like you're asylum seeker and the government refuse your demand, and then if you're diagnosed as HIV positive, so there is this law that you can ask for, they call it maladie, cartesian maladie. So it means that if you're diagnosed as HIV positive and you have the proof or consultations, medical records for at least 14 months straight, we can ask for legalization. So that means if you're asylum seeker and they refuse, and then you have this HIV, so we can ship it into another way for you to grant another way to become legal in France. So that includes the documents and the certificate from your doctor that saying this person is living with HIV with treatments and everything. And of course, with the help of the Attestation Domiciliation de Association, our association, because if you don't have this address, even if you have all these documents still, they will not give it, because that's why address is really very important in France.
You want to comment quickly? Then we take one final question from Akinas, and then we'll break for lunch. Yes.
Because People say Cyprus is the small brother of Greece. Our legislation are similar, and Cyprus tends to take on the activities and the legislation of Greece. So for you, luckily, in the asylum procedure, you can, if you are diagnosed and you get a document from the public hospital for the beneficiary, and that states that he is positive and states the CD4 levels, this can be submitted as an extra claim in his asylum application. What we usually do is we add this document, and we also add the grounds that, for example, if he's coming from an African country, that there will be difficulty for him or her to gain treatment, and also it's also the part of discrimination and stigmatization. And with these 4 reasons, from our previous experience, because now we cannot use it anymore, they are excluded from the asylum process and directed to the migration process, where they receive a residency permit for special reasons, specifically for the humanitarian reasons. Duration? This is indefinite.
Thank you, Ian. Akinas, your question, final?
Hi, I'm Akinos from the Black Sex Worker Collective. This is a question for Ian. Oh God, I'm tired. This is a question for Ian. Do you include or do you work with sex workers, and how are they a part of the actions that you all are doing?
Not directly, because most people do not disclose that they are sex workers. And it also depends on your description and definition of a sex worker. Because, for example, I will give you a short example. We have a huge problem when it comes to accommodation in Athens. And we have new arrivals who do not have a place to stay. So in a way, specific communities, they hang around in bars, and every night they're sleeping in a different place. This is a form of sex work according to the definition we have in Athens, but they do not declare it in this way. But in terms of sex work, it's very difficult because we have a very strict legislation when it comes to sex work. It is basically it is barely impossible for you to get the license, because it says you cannot practice your profession within a few meters from the church and a school. But you know, in Athens we have many churches. So it's difficult. It's difficult for you to get the documentation to be a legal sex worker. So most people, that's why it's difficult for us to define and use the term sex workers.
Thank you very much, Ian. And I would like to... Wow, okay, Alistair, okay. One, it's just because it is you, you know?
Here's me. Hello, Alistair Hudson, HIV Scotland. I'm not a migrant, at best an ally. A couple of things as we're moving towards a position paper. Thank you so much for the presentations. As somebody who's recently moved back to my home country after being displaced in the London, that's what they call it when you leave, for 33 years, it's been challenging and enriching. A couple of things, just to ask the panel in general. Do you think, in light of the lack of data, which I think we all acknowledge is hellish at best, in this space among many others, do you think it would be possible for a Europe-wide consensus on maybe indicators, or considering the lexicon about how we describe mental health? Because I think there's a real gap and maybe a real need for that could accommodate needs of sex workers, people who inject drugs, as well as a range of faith and the other stuff. My background was in the stigma index, and we spent endless hours trying to construct indicators specifically, and I hate the word indicators, maybe descriptors or the lexicon about how we do this. And I think there'd be a couple of assets from that. An internal piece about how we communicate with each other and to each other about what this means, migrant health as a space, and external comms, so we could challenge that collectively with a consensus statement. The other bit of it would be having indicators, maybe even a demographic framework about how we're going to consider researching this, that we get, and we say if your research isn't doing it, looking at this as a framework don't know whether it's practical or not, it's for discussion. Your research might not be considered fit for purpose. Finally, in light of Ian's last slide, which I think pretty much the case across Europe about statements and bits and bobs, and more horrifically perhaps around PrEP, which I think is still for many one of the best kept secrets in HIV. In Scotland there was a recent agenda about a PrEP success story, which when we looked at the data it was 95% GBMSM, and of them 92% were white. That is not a PrEP success story for Scotland. So I was thrilled to challenge that. But I think the opportunity here for the migrant community is maybe, we know that in a certain country it's a very GBMSM inhabited space, but I think migrancy might be able to really consider what PrEP constitutes PrEP candidacy could mean in girls, for trans people, for sex workers, for people that inject drugs, Europe-wide ends, just things for the thinking about. But do you believe it would be possible for this meeting maybe to consider a lexicon that would be fit for purpose?
So thank you. You want to respond to that?
Yeah, it was just like a very small clarification. I mean, terminology can change, but for sex worker movement, we define sex workers as anyone who exchange erotic or sexual services for, and it can be money, it can be accommodation, it can be food, it can be anything. So I think for us, it doesn't matter if the context is legal or not, and actually around 90% globally of countries criminalize one aspect of sex work. So there's very few sex work who work legally, even in countries like Turkey or Greece, where sex work is actually legal, but it's so constrained that very few sex workers can work legally. And I was just mentioned on refugees, that's something that we would like to work more as ESWA as well, looking at the particular needs of people, either refugees or asylum seekers who are selling sex or exchanging sex for accommodation. We have a new project on housing, and we're also working with our Turkish member who are based in Ankara, but also doing a lot of work with refugee sex workers. And again, even if people sometimes don't define themselves as sex workers, they would say I just have sex to be able to sleep somewhere or to have some food. Then for us, it's still sex work because it's exchange of sex work, exchange for sexual services for housing or fun, etc. Thank you.
Great. I hope we can carry the conversations to lunch. So I think Alistair was highlighting whether there is some consensus we need to develop around frameworks of reference for migrants and other intersectionalities. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you all for your contributions and to thank our wonderful audience for your patience. I know the stomachs are grumbling right now, so we might need to rush and get to that lunch very quickly. But we are coming back here at exactly 2:15, so giving you back 15 minutes. Please make it on time. We will request you to take a group photo in the lobby there when you come back, just before we begin. But for now, we want to release you to go for lunch. And the lunch is going to be in the restaurant area. We will be able to be guided there once we get there. So enjoy the lunch, and thank you again for your contributions this session.